I'm having a baby and you graduated. It's your turn. And I was all planned for that when Jake, my boss, came back from picking up the plane tickets, and I said, Jake, where's the plane tickets? When are we going? I gotta make arrangements with the people picking us up on the other side. And he said, I had some bills to pay, but I got money coming in next week, and we'll buy tickets with that. Our trip was in 2 weeks. So then he comes back, and this was a little later on, and we're gonna have to postpone our trip because we didn't have plane tickets. And he said, Orville, I need you to write a letter to everybody and tell them that we've been asked by the Clinton administration to help them on a major project, and that's why we were unable to meet the meeting and we regretfully have to postpone. He'd never talked with President Clinton. He had some sure-tell relative that knew somebody that was in the White House, and that was his connection. And he said, do this, and I said, no way. And so I had to make the choice. This $5,000 that he owes me, I'll never get if I walk away, but I can't do that. And I think that first losses are least losses. Alice taught me that. So I walked away. But one of the things that he did in order to thank me for the money that I loaned him was he came and he said, hey Orville, I've got some things at the house that you and your growing family might need. So Paul, my friend, and I went to his house. We picked up a mattress and some china that he had. I can't remember what else, but one thing was a wooden door that he had hand carved in Mexico. And any of you that come to boot camp, you see that we use that as the conference table in the little office next to the container, and that door is still sitting there. That door comes from this story. So Paul, after we do that, he was just shaking his head, and I told him that I had borrowed money from our friend Ken Fox, and I didn't know how I was going to pay him back. And Paul and Amy had an intervention, and they said, Orville, you have some responsibilities. You can't do this. You need to focus on getting a good job. You need to focus on taking care of your family. And I remember thinking, and Becca was telling me about Paul, and we were reminiscing, and I remembered my mindset at the time. I was never looking for a job. I was always looking for opportunity. And opportunities without limits would be much better than just opportunities. I wasn't looking to build a resume, I was looking to build a story. And there were lots of bad things that happened along my life, but I thought, hey, this will make a great story. And we talked about making the write-up before and about being happy in the moment when things bad are happening. And I think that's just something that I've always felt. That's been an optimistic side of me, and I've always been able to do that. But we took different paths, Paul and I. And what I realized in that is that there are two different ways to look at the world. And one way that we look at the world is to find safety and comfort and predictability at the expense of our freedom and we put limits on ourselves in order to have security. Or we can live a life that is big and bold and one that is, in the end, going to be an amazing story. And when I think of amazing stories, I'm reminded of what my kids have been doing this week. I don't know if you've noticed, but Owen, Emma, and Grace haven't been here for the first part of the reunion. And you might think this is a big deal. Why would your kids not be here? They've been here all the others. But they have been in Wyoming. I've got a picture of them here. They had an opportunity to trek in handcarts along the Mormon Trail where my ancestors trekked along the Mormon Trail in 1856. And I'll tell you the story of the Reeder family. Those of you who know Stephen Reeder, he's my cousin. He carries the name. My mom is a Reeder. I have a Thompson name. You know, I think about my great-grandfathers, my great-great-great-grandfathers. What do we have? 32 great-great-great-grandfathers. We have 64 great-great-great-great-grandfathers. When I think about it, I think maybe know one or two of them. Why do I know one or two out of the 64 and not the other 62? It's because these were men and women who had great stories. So the readers lived in Linstead, Parva, Suffolk, England. Our consultants in the UK don't know where that is. I pointed on a map and they said, "That's part of England?" I said, "Yeah, it's in the middle of the island." And they say, "Oh, I still didn't think that's part of England. Nobody I know has ever come from that part of England. It's remote." But in 1850s, my fourth great grandfather, David Reeder, he had been widowed. He had 5 children. And he was raising them as a tenant farmer. The opportunities for his family were limited. In America, there was not only religious freedom for the faith that he had found, but there was opportunity, there was land, there was space to grow and to have a family. So the older son, George, came to Utah and settled in Utah and had enough money to send home to his family so that David, his father, who was 54, could travel with his married daughter, Eliza, with her husband, James, and their 3 children, Mary, Sarah, and Emma. We didn't know that we named our daughters after them. It was a coincidence later on as we started to do history. But I knew the story of Robert Reeder growing up, and Robert was 19, and he had his little sister Caroline, who was 17. So they come across from Liverpool to Newcastle, New York, and when they landed, my great-great-great-grandfather Robert was so weak he couldn't get off the boat because he couldn't hold food down the whole time. He said, "I subsisted mainly on vinegar and brown sugar for 3 weeks, but I couldn't walk when I came off the boat." But in a couple of weeks, they'd take steamboats and trains to the Iowa City camping grounds where they were working to put together the hand carts because they were going to walk to Utah. So as they were crossing the Missouri, there was a band of settlers who were going along the Oregon Trail, perhaps to Oregon, perhaps to California, in a small band that had been attacked by a local tribe, Native Americans, and all they found were their half-buried bodies and their outfits burning. That would be pretty scary. A few days later, they were encircled by the same tribe, and all of the oxen and cattle that they were going to be using to take most of the gear and food was stampeded off. So they took all of the flour that was in the cabin or the wagons, and they put it in their hand carts. And 500-600 pounds on a hand cart that was meant to carry 200 or 300 pounds, and they started walking across Iowa and Nebraska. By the time they arrived at Fort Laramie, Wyoming, the weather was starting to turn. It was an early winter. They were there in October. My great-great-great-grandfather David would push his hand cart until he would fall today, and then he would drag himself to camp. One morning, right outside of Fort Laramie, in the early October, he didn't wake up. And so Robert had to, with his 2 sisters, bury their father under willows and rocks so that the wolves wouldn't disturb him, and on they went. 2 weeks later, a winter storm had set in, and it was bitter cold. And they didn't have enough provisions. They were down to a quarter cup of flour a day per person. Caroline was a beautiful teenage girl, a couple years younger than Robert. And she was coming into camp one day on a bitter cold day, and she had stopped to gather sagebrush in her bundle and tied it together so that they could create a smoky fire to have some degree of warmth. She was down on the road, and she set her bundle down, and she sat down and leaned up against it for a minute. And by the time they realized it, she was chilled and frozen through, and she passed away that night. And so Robert had to bury his sister. Eliza, her and his older sister, had 3 daughters. She had one in Iowa right as the trip started. That baby only